In 1923, my late great grandmother, Virginia Burks, was born. And 6 years later, in 1929, the Great Depression started. And the Great Depression was deemed to be the longest, deepest, and most widespread depression of the 20th century. My great grandmother told me a story of living through that time as a young girl. Her parents would send her to food rationing lines where the government was rationing out the food that they had available to the population. And my great grandmother one time went to this rationing line where she got a loaf of bread and she put it in her bag. And the person working at the rationing line must have made a mistake and not checked her off. And the next person who was helping ration loaves of bread thought that she didn't have one. So my great grandmother, being a young child, took advantage of the opportunity and actually got more rations than she was supposed to be allocated. So she brought this back to her mother, and she was very excited because they were able to get more bread than what they expected. And her mother told her that she needed to go back and she needed to return the extra food. And my great grandmother, puzzled, thinking that what she did was a good thing, asked her why. And her mother told her, "You should only take what you need." And that lesson was something that she passed on down to me, and it's stuck with me ever since I've heard that story of being honest and being observant of what I need and what my family needs in this current day. In all intents and purposes, a much more civilization that has abundance than what we actually need. It brings me back to when I had just graduated high school and I had gotten a job at an insurance agency that my aunt owned. And as I was working there, a former high school classmate bumped into me when I was out and about. And I was telling him that I had just got a job at the insurance agency, and he asked me how much I was making. And that's a question that, for whatever reason or another, our society feels that is not appropriate to talk about pay and what you earn. So at that time, I just told him that I was getting paid enough. And he was working at an auto parts store at the time, and there was someone behind me in line waiting to get rang up. And when I told my friend that I was making enough, the guy behind me laughed, and I looked at him and he said, "It's never enough." It made me think of why. Why is that the case? Why do we find ourselves in a place where having what we need isn't enough? Not being specific and not being clear on the difference between what's needed and what's wanted. I think that being clear on what our priorities are, what's of value, what's essential, and doubling down on that would help alleviate much anxiety and much fear of, do I have enough and am I doing enough? And the definition of enough is something that I believe is intimate to you and your specific situation and the people that count on you and depend on you and that are surrounded by you. and that are impacted by your actions. I can't define what is enough for you, but if you don't define what is enough in terms of your own personal beliefs, then someone else or society at large will step in and define it for you. And when you leave it up to the outside to define what's inside, you become at risk at being susceptible to the volatility and the fluctuations of everything that's outside of you dictating what's happening inside of you. So for me, the way that I approach this, and it's a continuous process of checking in with myself and checking in with my loved ones, of how do we define what's meaningful to us? How do we define what's valuable? How do we categorize our priorities and execute accordingly? Which, asking these questions of yourself and working with those that are around you helps you cultivate a better picture with more clarity and helps you define what is enough. Thank you for listening and have a great week.